That's an antenna, and then you talk into this.
This is the antenna. How's that?
Yeah.
That's silly.
All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. There's so many of you.
This is great.
We should maybe introduce ourselves. Well, everybody already knows who Sharon is. Sharon is the artist of this incredible show out here, early works made in the early to mid 90s, even in the late 80s, and even in the late 80s.
And Pete is a guy that's been following which here. Now, he's been writing about everything that we used to do, and then we're still doing. That's wonderful,
good.
wonderful
That's
writer, wonderful art historian, and wonderful curator.
Thank you. I should say that nominally I'm listed as the curator of this show, but really I feel like I was the co-organizer of this show with Sharon, who did much of the work. Really, I feel like I came up with the very broad strokes of the premise, and we got together and had a couple of studio visits and picked up some of the work together.
And
But
the show wouldn't be here if you didn't participate.
well,
Thank you.
Well, and I feel likewise. So, as Sharon mentioned, I've been writing about artists working in Houston in the 70s and 80s, and I've been working on this project for about 5 years now, and the result is this book that has recently come out, and they have it here at the bookstore if you're interested, and came out on Texas A&M University Press. They were wonderful to work with, and I'm really happy that during the course of the research I've gotten to know Sharon and a lot of her contemporaries who have been really very open and welcoming and trusting of me with their stories. And there just is an incredible history here in Houston of these artists who have really shaped the scene, I feel, during this era. Like what we have today, we would not have if it weren't for the heroic efforts of people like Sharon who were active during this period. So I think we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight.
I feel lucky to have been at the right place at the right time when all of this was happening.
Well, I wonder if I can step back a bit and get you to talk a little bit about how you became involved in art making in the first place, and a little bit what your background was leading up into your time at University of Houston.
Okay. I always was doing art on my own, I guess my whole life, from mud to anything else. But and I always had the interest, and I did take art when I got to junior high school. I went the first 8 years to Catholic elementary, and art was coloring the pages of the science book. But it was a big deal that they have a science book. The science book, however, said on the first day God created the heavens and the earth. And the second day, and on and on. We got to color it in. So that was my first experience with art. And just like my husband Gus, we had a Robert Wood reproduction hanging over the sofa. So, and that was the extent of my exposure to art. But that changed. I'm lucky that changed in life, and I've been to many museums now and many art openings and places.
And you were teaching in the public schools
I
in Houston in
did.
the 70s.
Let's see. Yes, from 1970 to 79, I taught in the public schools in Houston. And 79, well, I started coming back to University of Houston in maybe 75 or 76 and taking a post-baccalaureate, just landscape painting classes. I really was fascinated with the work of John Alexander. So I sought out his classes, and there was an afternoon landscape painting class, so I took it maybe 3 times. You know, I just kept starting to build my own vocabulary and my own body of work, and eventually applied to go to graduate school at the University of Houston. And that's when I stopped teaching in the public schools.
And at the time that you were at University of Houston, something very important happened there, which was there was a fire at the art building in December of 1978. So the building that all the painting and sculpture was happening at burned to the ground, and they had to relocate the program. So the director of the program, George Bunker, brought the faculty over to storage space that had been given to the university by Schlumberger. It was a former cable factory. They were using it for basically for storage. So the art faculty was brought over to this huge, enormous open space and very apologetically told that unfortunately this is all we have to offer you. This huge, unsupervised space.
It's amazing.
What was it like?
It was amazing. Well, the only drawback was no air conditioning and not even any ventilation. So we had anything open that would be open. And but I got there and it was so hot, but the space was so huge. You could just pick your space. It wasn't like anything I'd ever experienced. Like normally you go to a class and you pick up your things and leave, take them with you when you go. We were permanently installed, and there were whole rooms or whole areas, and I just picked one and set up, and it was a wonderful experience in that we ended up working a lot of times all night long, and that's what the most unique thing was. And I think it was because we were all so close to each other so many hours a day that we kind of did develop a look. And I didn't ever really feel part of that look because it was really bright, vivid, expressionistic colors. But I was part of the expressionistic part, so.
Well, I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about the influence of the German expressionists that came through the Professor Peter Gunther.
Again, being at the right place at the right time. Peter Gunther is a genius he was about art history. Not only that, he knew so many of the German expressionists. He was from Germany, and he attended the Bauhaus School himself. So we had all of this wealth of knowledge. And he was just very, very generous with his time and very willing to give us his whole attention. And that's another great experience of those years.
Other artists who were there, Kelly Allison, Jim Poe, Jeff DeLude, all these people also credit this influence as well from Peter Gunther.
So no, his German expressionist class, there'll never be one that would touch that because he knew the artist. So amazing.
Well, and Lawndale was not just a place for learning and taking classes. These students also built out these incredible gallery bays where there was a constant overturning of, very professional, actually,
very
exhibitions.
We were naked on the roof sometimes. Took time spraying the boots, but we never had any hard drugs. Pot. But I mean, it's everything you needed to actually feel like you were really developing your own art. We had a lot of leeway.
Can you tell us about the exhibition? It wasn't the first exhibition at Lawndale, but it was the first major exhibition at Lawndale, which was called Powwow. Can you tell us what that was?
I actually believe it might be the first exhibition at Lawndale. Because I entered graduate school and I set up that summer in the heat. That was the year of the 1980 heat wave. Okay, so I got my space set up and then in September, we started classes and James Searles came in. I want to have a big show. Just like James talks, let's have a big show. Let's invite everybody in Texas. Let's invite, and so he called up all these people that he knew, and he had to make it, we were still painting the bays. They were kind of a mustard yellow when we got there. I guess it's good for a cable country. So we all put the coats of paint on it, and they decided we'd do a costume ball. And he had to make the size no bigger than 8 by 8, because he had invited literally hundreds of people to be in it, and famous, unknown, everyone was invited, and just about everybody brought something. San Antonio came, Austin came, some from Louisiana. It was, I don't know how many hundreds of pieces were there, but they were all hung. Sculpture couldn't be any bigger than 8 by 8 by 8, and two-dimensional 8 by 8. And it was one event, one hot event again. It was still late August, I believe, or was it September already? But the only costume I had this suit of armor. So I actually put it on, part of it at least. And it was, I just remember how hot it was there. But I had fun.
The director, George Bunker, came dressed as James Searles with a ponytail, a mustache, and a bone earring.
George Bunker, bless his heart, he didn't know what to think of us, but he didn't say no. He called us all together. He said, "You want Lawndale," because he wanted to put us somewhere else at one point. He was worried about insurance. He's worried about all the things that a department chair is supposed to be worried about. So he said, "Okay, you want Lawndale. I don't want to hear a single complaint about the heat or ventilation, and you can have Lawndale." So we kind of, I don't know if we signed anything or just gave a verbal okay, but that's what started, and I do believe that show was the very first exhibit, and it was crowded. There were tons of people there. So how many of you, anyone else in here, what do we call that show? Powwow. Who else was at Powwow? Oh, great. Well, it was a memorable event.
Lawndale was also a place where there was constantly music there. People like Ornette Coleman and the Art Ensemble of Chicago. Kelly Allison talks about, how she remembers working in her studio and hearing Philip Glass rehearsing there and just playing the same musical phrase over and over and over again for hours while she was
And then there was the pan band.
Tell us about that.
Oh God, one of the janitors, he had this group of buddies, and he was from Jamaica. And they took some old drums and they hammered them. Well, that part was very disturbing, actually, if you're trying to paint. But once they finally got them made, it began to be music instead of just hammering to make a drum. So anyway, it was, and they played, of course, James Searles had it all figured out. He didn't have any money, so the pan band played at every opening. And everybody brought a bottle of wine, and they were poured into one huge bowl, threw some fruit in there, and called it sangria, and it was done. We made it happen. And a lot of that was James Searles and John Alexander. Mostly James doing the organizing and John finding the artists sometimes. But it was a great combination.
Can you tell us something about the work you were making at that time?
I was really experimenting. I had come in with my idea, of kind of almost decorative landscapes. And I really started changing. I started looking at Munch and all the other artists in the German Expressionist class, and it really affected the work of most of the people in there. German Expressionists ran through that Lawndale upstairs. It was just, we were so affected by that, the angst, the whole frenzy, the emotion, all of that. So I began to develop into, well, basically, I came out being, I think I was a romantic expressionist when I got done. And then they said, there's no such thing. I'm okay.
Will you tell us about the painting that greets us when we come in the door here?
Yeah. That was done when I was in graduate school, and it did not do well at the critique. I rarely did well with the critiques. But one of the instructors, I will not mention the name, but told me, do anything but that. That doesn't exist. Start over. But I really couldn't, because that was what I was trained to do. And then when I went to Peru finally, I stepped in it. I stepped into the desert that the bones went everywhere. And it was, I realized that it did exist. So it changed my life. That trip to Peru changed my life.
So this really is the turning point that this show is about and designed around. And I wonder if you could tell us some more about really just everything you remember about that trip and what you did and your impressions and how that fed into the art that you made immediately afterwards.
Well, probably the one place that really affected me the most was the Nazca Desert. We had just come from seeing the Nazca lines, those little airplanes. You get in them and go, oh no. And you take all this drugs to make you not get right. So anyway, the little plane goes. See, they're all down there. There's like 8 or 9 of them, and the little plane's going, and then it gets to it and it goes, and then it goes, so the people on the other side can see. And about 8 of those, I was glad I took the Dramamine, but then we got out of there and we were just kind of wobbling, and we ran into a taxi driver, right, Paul? Yeah. He may remember that better than me. Paul and Nancy Johnson, they were with us, and he took us to this cemetery. And you looked up the name of the cemetery because I didn't even remember. But the grave robbers had gone in and they took the burial cloths, they took the pottery, yeah, and then they just scattered the bones. And the desert, the bones in the desert, it was amazing. They were bleached so white. And it is just like, an apparition of some kind for me. And I took all that back with me. But I also knew that somehow I felt it in that painting before I ever got there. And that's all I can explain about that. I felt like I was stepping into my painting. So it was life-changing.
And there's some other works in this show that predated that trip that are also like about these skeletal form, these sort of biomorphic paintings. So this was already an interest for you.
I was going into that, and I never really understood why. It just happened. Like you researched. I did have one of those little Viewmaster reels of the Inca burials when I was a kid. And I was drawn to that then. So it's just something that's a personal draw for me, an interest.
And you had some other adventures down there, for example, this trip to Machu Picchu.
4.5 days, 4.5 days on the trail. And these two. And we had to carry everything. Now, if you go do the Machu Picchu trip, you have a guide. He carries your backpacks. They fix you dinners at night. We had none of that. Everything that we ate was in our packs. And we had little brown pills to put in the water so that we could drink it. We got it out of the streams. But I brought instant tea with me because the pills did not change the color of the water. And so I put instant tea in there so that it would just be brown. And then I could drink it. But we did crazy things. One night we saw white cows. Do you remember that? The white cows? And I had nightmares. I was afraid those white cows were going to step on my tent. And then we got to Machu Picchu, and no one was there. How many of you have been to, yeah, you want to say something about?
Yeah, so I have to explain no one was there. So we get into Machu Picchu the first day, and the tourist train is leaving. And it's not like it is now. If you've been in the last 10, 15 years, it's completely different. There was the hotel at the ruin at Machu Picchu, and then there was a hostel in Aguas Calientes, and that was the only hotels. So most of the tourists came in on the train, got on the train and left. They spent 4 hours in Machu Picchu, they're done, and they're back to Cusco. We get in as the tourist train is leaving, we get cleaned up, we go down to the bar and eat drinking pisco sours. And the manager comes in and starts talking to her brother, my brother-in-law, who was living in Peru at the time. And the manager of the hotel comes in, he's all upset and talks to Richard for a while. And Richard finally turns to us and says, "There's been a landslide. There will be no tourist train tomorrow." And so the 5 of us and 3 women from Australia who were in the hotel were the only tourists in Machu Picchu.
Wow.
So we never saw them in the ruins. So the next day, for that 48 hours, we were the only 5 in.
All of our photos have nothing but the architecture. That can never happen, probably. But we had a very unique time in Peru.
Well, so when we got back to Houston, you had just graduated, by the way. We kind of
Yes.
skipped over that part.
Yes, I did.
You had just as your thesis show was actually up in the
Yes.
gallery.
I hired someone to take it down. I hate when shows come down. It's like isn't that right?
It's sad. Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. See, it's universal. So I escaped to Peru.
So coming back to Houston after that, can you tell us about the painting that occupied a lot of your time over the next several years?
I did some of the like the one in here, Inca drawing, was one of the first sketches, and then impressions and some of those. But the first really large painting took me almost 2 years. And I just kept working on it, and I kept seeing 4 figures, because there were 5 of us on the trip, but one of us was always taking the pictures. So, 4 niches. So the painting, I just gave it a crazy title, because I made up a word, and the bad, the ugly, the proud, the disconcerted. I just wanted to call it that, and I don't even know who was who. But it took so long, and then it's when I really first started building out things on a painting. It just wasn't enough to have it flat anymore. And that painting ended up in fresh paint. And I was really, pleased to have it there. Then that just came all the way off and became sculptures.
Also this time, you were working for the Orange Show in the sort of the infancy of the organization. And I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about what that was like, sort of
It
getting
was
this
fabulous,
passion.
and Miss Orange Show is sitting right here, so.
Hey, Miss Orange
But,
Show.
Actually, John Alexander, I didn't have a job, I was just out of school. He said, "Why don't you come," and I started as a volunteer, "Why don't you come volunteer to help them?" And I didn't know anything about putting together mailing lists or any of that, but I was over there doing what I could. And then I was invited to the very first. I think I've made all of the benefits, but that first one was at the Orange Show. Yeah.
I presume everyone in this
Wait a
room
minute.
knows what the Orange Show
I
is.
just was gonna say that Sharon is leaving out her amazing first true gift was we didn't have any money for anything, and so we did hire Sharon, among her all her other things that she was doing, to be our treasurer. I think this is important. You know.
It's a good thing we didn't have much money anyway.
Anyway,
In a fishing tackle box, how appropriate. Right?
yeah, and it's always been sort of one of her secrets. I thought it's a small group. We'll just tell the truth about her. She did a great job. And no one ever guessed she was going to be a great painter while she was busy doing the treasury work.
Least of all, me. But it was nice. All that experiences, all those things add up to make us who we are.
Well, getting back to that major painting that was in fresh paint, maybe you can tell me about Alan Stone. This is a very important New York City art dealer who came here to Houston and discovered
Marilyn
this painting.
Marilyn was involved in so much of my life, but she invited him to her daughter's wedding and then asked us to pick him up at the airport. So Gus and I picked him up at the airport, and first thing was he wanted a hamburger. His wife had him on a diet, and he was away from home. And then we took him to a hamburger joint right around the corner from my studio. And so we took him in there, and he seemed to like the work enough to purchase the bad, the ugly, the proud, the disconcerting. So, and then they came around, I don't know how much later, not much, and decided to put it into fresh paint.
This painting, this sort of a sculptural relief painting has, various things embedded in it, including
Anchovies.
anchovies.
They're very well embedded.
There was some concern when the painting went to New York City and the conservator looked at it and was concerned about the
I don't remember
anchovies.
the name of the guy who was running, what was that?
PS1.
PS1. But I got a call, and it was the funniest call, because he was serious, and I thought he was kidding. And he said, he said, I've just counted 280 anchovies on the